used to start at 10 o'clock, but now they start at 9:30.
Well, that's good. There's also a Flutter Engage seminar at 9:30 today, and I was going to share that with the group, and I was going to conclude around 9:25 today. That way, people can make their way to their next event.
Okay, great.
Awesome. So we'll just give it about 5 minutes for people to dig in here. But I saw your GitHub repository where you've started to work on some Python Jupyter workbooks. Would you be happy to talk a bit about the work you've done there?
Yeah, actually, I've added a bunch of starter notebooks now.
Welcome, Jake.
Hi, Jake.
Hello.
So I did figure out the inventories and the plants. I was able to read those in to pandas by just specifying the valid columns and not reading in the invalid columns. And so that works now. That was a sticking point. And so I put those up in the GitHub repository.
And then did you maybe see what are the common inventory types and the not so common ones by chance?
I don't remember that right now, but you can download that workbook and look and
Can maybe dig into that next time. But here, just in this opening bit, I'm going to go ahead and share some links with you here just while we're waiting for some people. So, welcome, Nick.
Hi, Nick.
Let's see here. So, David Busby over at OpenTHC put together this SQLite file for business to consumer sales. So if you were having trouble working with the large sales file, this is essentially the sales file in a large SQL database, if that's easier for you to work with. And so I just received that, in the past couple of days. So I'm going to be taking a look at it myself, and perhaps next week we can, do some work with SQL and taking some poke at the sales data. But just keep in mind, was there a question or something?
I was wondering if we could use Dask to deal with those really large files.
Can you tell us about Dask, please?
Dask allows you to multitask, multi-thread things, and then also it reads pandas files, but it does it. It chunks them up, and if there's not enough room in memory, it stores them on disk, and so it saves them in pages. But you don't, and then you can just use them. It integrates with pandas, scikit-learn, most Python.
And it's just spelled DASK?
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely worth checking out. So I'll put that on the agenda for next week. Would that be useful for the raw files or this?
I haven't used it that much. I know it works well with pandas and scikit-learn. And also, if you have multiple machines, you can run Dask on each one of the machines, and it'll use the memory and processor on each one of the machines.
And you may need a nice setup if you're working with this data. So David was telling me, he's basically he's running this locally on a server. So he's just got this giant SQL database just sitting there locally. So it'd be kind of expensive to put this in the cloud. But um,
Actually, yeah, I want to check out the SQL because there's a lot of things I feel like you could do. A lot of queries and that with the SQL would be great.
exactly. So we can get our hands into that and for next week. And then I guess just go ahead and to kick it off here. Just for the people who are new here or who just got here in the past like 5 minutes, I think we're gonna go to about 9:25 today because Charles is heading to an event, and then I'm going to be listening into this Flutter Engage at 9:30. I'm not sure if any of you use Flutter, but it's sort of a fun tool. So it's going to be interesting to see. Um, I would like to see that get pretty popular because it's still pretty new. But anywho, just sharing that. All right, so I guess I can just go ahead and share my screen and just show you some of the things I'm doing, and then we can talk about it along the way if that sounds good to you. Great. So essentially, we were starting to look at the different sample types last week, and there's probably going to be different types of cannabinoids for the different sample types, right? So oils, of course, are going to have a higher distribution than flour. So I just thought this would be an interesting thing to look at. So over in Spider, or you could use your favorite, your favorite text editor and your favorite programming language. But once again, I'm just working with the same LCB data dump, just because the variables are relatively the same. So I figured if I can master it for 1 month, then it should be fairly easy to generalize to the full data set. So just go ahead and I'm not sure if this is actually going to be in the right location. So never mind this. Okay, so essentially, we're just going to read this data in here, and we're gonna start looking at some of these sample types that we looked at last week. So, real quick here, I'm actually just going to go ahead and just commit everything over to GitHub just so that everybody can follow along. So. And then, just so, everybody, can follow along with all the material. I'm trying to keep most things here in the Cannabis Data Science repository. So that'll need to get cleaned up a little bit, but so far just sort of archiving things there. And then okay, so we've got our data read in, and so the tool that I'll be using today is just Seaborn, which is sort of an extension of Matplotlib. So Seaborn requires Matplotlib, so you can see it more of an extension or an enhancement. So we'll go ahead and grab those packages. And essentially, let's find out what columns we even have here. So it's sort of a handful, but essentially we'd want to look at some of these cannabinoids that may be of like interest to people. So we could maybe create a total cannabinoid calculation. But at the moment, let's just pick a this first cannabinoid here, THCA. And so in the lab, you could call this an analyte. So you could say your analyte is THCA. And so now let's just basically look at the distribution of THCA in the lab data, and let's see what happens. Okay, so that's what happened. I think we want so we'll just look at the kernel density of this analyte. So this may take a minute since there's a lot of data. And essentially, you can add the hue, which is the actual variable type. So the actual, inventory type, remember, is the intermediate type. So we'll eventually check out the hue with intermediate type. So we may have to get just a subset of our data here. I wonder if we can just do a sample of it. Okay, so now we've just got a random sample of the data. So now maybe it'll be a bit more approachable. Okay, so we've at least got a chart now. And so this is just an estimated distribution of THC. So not the most informative chart ever. It looks like there's a grouping lower down towards 0. Perhaps that's edibles or things of that sort, or miscodings, or it's hard to say at this point. And then there's a grouping up here. And you can see there's a slight bump up here, which must be the oils. But you really need to separate this by the actual intermediate type for it to be informative. So let's look at how we can adapt this plot here. I'd really like to use this plot, but it looks like my Seaborn version may be outdated. Okay. You could just add hue, but okay, so it looks like my Seaborn version may be outdated. So, we may have to just come back to these at another point. However, we can maybe now change gears into something else interesting that I was going to show you today. So we've been talking about mocking up the Leaf API, and I thought, okay, the first step is we're going to need a database just to store some things. So I just thought, okay, well, we'll just go ahead and use the database that essentially I'm already using for some of this open source material that I'm putting out through Canlytics. So some of the tools I'll show you today that essentially I'm using to mock up the API are essentially the Canlytics engine, and then the Canlytics API. And I'll go ahead and commit the latest work here, which has these two mock endpoint. These basically I've gone ahead and mocked the lab results endpoint and the MME's endpoint, and then we can go ahead and I'll gradually mock all of the Leaf API endpoints, and then you can use them as you please for testing and whatnot. But they'll be fairly limited with a limited amount of data. So and then I'll go ahead and share these links with you here in the chat. So there's the API and the engine. And so essentially, I'll just go ahead and just kind of show you these. And, nothing's set in stone here. These are just sort of general tools that, I was putting together just to help with cannabis analytics. So, we're doing Cannabis Data Science here. So these are just sort of open-ended packages that you can use to contribute to help your workflow. So the engine is just a Python package, which you can just install, with your command prompt. So you can just, pip install Canlytics to get the latest version. And we're at the moment, so you've now got Canlytics installed. And then let me actually restart Spider and I'll show you a bit more about that. But essentially, at the moment, it just leverages Firebase for a database. So if you want to learn about Firebase, I'll put that in the chat. And so Firebase is sort of a fork of MongoDB. And I also like MongoDB, so that's worth checking out. And so these are, what you'd call, a NoSQL database. So it doesn't have quite the same connective structure as the SQL database. And just to kind of just give you a look at what the data looks like here. So here's just some collections that I've made with some of the MME data. So you have essentially a directory. So you can think about it as of a directory of collections and documents. And then all documents are essentially a JSON file. So you can think about these as, key value pairs. So you essentially just have a giant JSON database. So it has its pros and its cons. The cons right off the bat are going to be it's much hard. Well, it depends on your perspective, but it can be harder to do queries and aggregations than it is in an SQL database. And then, it has some advantages in that you're just going JSON to JSON, and sometimes the loose structure can be beneficial. And it can be fast if you know what you're looking for. So once again, nothing's set in stone, but I essentially just tossed the MME data, and I tossed about 1,000 lab results here, just so that way you can just pull these to start doing some practice. So how did I get those there? I used the Canlytics engine. So I think I put that in the chat. Yeah, so that's the Canlytics engine. And so this is just essentially a wrapper around Firebase. So Firebase already has a Python SDK, but this is an even more expedient way to interact with the data. And so just put some useful tools here. So you can initialize Firebase. There's a bunch of wrappers to get documents, get collections. You can import data. So this handles importing data into Firebase from CSVs and Excel. So fairly way to get your data in. And so that's essentially one thing that Firebase was lacking, was easy imports and easy exports. So there you go. Now you've got an easy way to import data, and an easy way to export data from Firebase. And if you look in the tests, you can see how you can go about spinning up your Firebase instance. And then I actually used that code right there to populate these two collections. So it's all open source, so you can use it yourself and populate your own Firebase database essentially for free if that's something you're looking to do. You do have to pay for Firebase, but at the moment the cost is really low. So as long as you keep your usage low, then it's essentially free. So it's a nifty tool, but I'm not set in stone to any one particular tool. So use your favorite tool there. And so then we've got our data there with the Cannalytics engine. And so now we can retrieve it with the Cannalytics API. And so once again, you can find the code here on GitHub. But this is essentially going to be the interface to all the actions that you can do in Cannalytics. So if you want to interact with any of this data, then you can use the Cannalytics API, which includes batteries included. It includes the Cannalytics engine. So this tool is bundled up inside the API. So once again, nothing is set in stone, but it's just a classic example of dog fooding, where you eat your own dog food. So you use your own tools. So that's the idea here, is just building a set of tooling to perform cannabis analysis. That way, we can control everything from the ground up. We can control database interactions, so you can get pretty low level. And then there's actually a lot more here than just database. So for example, you can work with storage, so you can put files into storage. You can download files, rename files, delete files. There's also authentication, so you can create users. You can give the users custom claims. You can give them custom tokens. And so the token would be for if you want to log in on your front end. So this is essentially a back-end system that can talk with your front end. And then, there's utility functions to, get your users, update a user, and delete a user if need be. So it's just, a little back-end service wrapper around Firebase. So if you need those services, then this may be an easy interface for you. So let's go ahead and test some of these things out. So you can essentially clone the repository, and then you'll have this repo here. Looks like everything went through. And then just to kind of walk you through, so first things first, you'd clone the repository. And then you can actually run the server locally. So just to sort of give you an example of how you could go about doing that. So you'd go to the folder where you downloaded or you cloned the API. You can open the command console, and then you can just run server. It looks like one of my endpoints is not 100% correct here, so we can just jump in there. And so just to kind of show you a little bit about the API and tell you a little bit about it. So you've learned now that, okay, the database is a Firestore. And so the API is Python Django. And so the typical structure here of a Django file, so in the root directory, you have your requirements, you have your README. I'm just using Node just to kind of help run some helper functions. There's no actual Node dependencies. And then, Docker to get it up to, it's actually running in Google Cloud App Engine, but you can run it anywhere that you desire. And so just to give you a quick structure, so all the code is in the Cannalytics API. And so just to give you an idea of what a Django project looks like, you'll have a settings file, and this is typically fairly long. You kind of want to try to keep it short, and this is just where you define all your key parameters towards how everything's going to be functioning. So this is where you define any third-party apps you're using. And we're going to be using the REST framework since we're going to be building an API here. And then everything else is relatively just boilerplate. So the rest of this is essentially just boilerplate to make everything else run. And you'll need to set up essentially your example credentials. So if you walk through the README, I may have to flesh that out a bit about how to set up with credentials, but essentially you'll need to get these credentials set to really use this in development. So you've got your settings, and then where all the beauty happens, so you've got your URLs, and so these are going to be your actual endpoints. So for example, your endpoint here, and so it didn't like that these began with a slash. So your endpoint here is just going to be test, leaf, MMEs. And so I'm pointing this to essentially a Python function. So I've just put these in this file over here. And so then, this can give you some ideas about what Django endpoints may look like. So for a REST API, it's just a Python function that takes the request as an argument. You check the method of the request. So say you wanted to add functionality here for labs to actually create results, well, then you would add a post, and then you would say, right? And then, you may even just, you could return a not implemented error, right? So, eventually, we'll want to go ahead and build out that functionality. Since we're essentially, remember, let's not lose sight of the original goal, right? Our original goal is we're essentially just creating a mock Leaf API so we can just basically mock some of these calls ourselves. Okay, so let's go ahead and see this in action. So, we can come over here. We'll just create a blank file here. Right, and so just since we're working in Python, we can use the requests package. And, the base. So the production base, if you want to test out what's in production, it's going to be api.canlytics.com. But, for right now, we're just going to be using the development base, so that way I can make rapid changes here just for just to kind of show what we can do in development, and that way you can learn how to do development yourself if you're interested. So we've got it set up. Remember, we're going to be hitting these endpoints. So let's try to get the MMEs. And so we just, we're just going to make a get request. So requests. Took a second, so we got a 200 status code. I don't know. So I guess let's just do a data dump and see what we got. No promises here. This is a live test. Oh, and sure enough, look at that. So that's a little much to work with. So let's just look at the first observation. Oh, so it's not a list. So let's see what we're even working with here. So we've got a dictionary. So it looks like at the moment the Canlytics API, let's actually go, and so this is what's nice from building it from the ground up, is you can actually now come over here and we can actually look at the endpoint. So we can see what the endpoint's actually doing. So that way it's not a black box, right? So now we control the data import, right? So we've now imported data here into Firebase. We've got the records here, right? So here we have somebody at 555 Brown Street, LCB Grow. Okay, so we want, to basically, be able to query that with our API. So let's start tinkering. So we're getting our MME data. So if we make our request, it'll check to see if there's a limit. Otherwise, there won't be one. So let's test this limit out. So the way you could do that is you're just going to do Q or question mark, limit. So let's just try doing a limit of 2. Yeah, that's right. So now it looks like we may have gotten an error. So we got a 500 error code. And what's nice is, we're in development here, so we can actually see the debug error. So, so this is how you would do development. So you would see, okay, there was a GET request to the Leaf MMEs. And look, here's the error. 2 has class string, but we expected an integer. Okay, so we can go and tinker on this MMEs endpoint. So we now know this limit has to be an integer. So just a hot fix here. We could do better logic later on, but you could just say, you could just do something silly like that, So if there's a limit, make sure the limit's an integer. And so you can go ahead and save that. This should, I think this should just refresh. I'm not sure if I've got the live server rerunning. Interesting. So just to kind of clean up the code a little bit. And actually, we may even just want to change this just to return the docs just outright. I think that's just a bit better. And let's actually just go ahead and respin this server. When you're actually doing development, there is a live reload package, which makes things a lot better. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, so now we've got a fast response. We've got our 200 status code, and we've got 2 documents here. So so now this little fix here to the limit, that seemed to do the trick. And, if we look at our data, we've got 555 Brown Street, the LCB grow, and so the next step is really to set this up to actually handle queries. And so the nifty thing is the get collection routine is set up to handle filters. So, we can basically pass, filters of the sort, key, so say we wanted, key, name, operation, right? So on my to-do list is to actually set up these endpoints to be able to handle queries, because we could actually set this up to really handle any sort of query, because it would be cool to set it up so that way you could query by phone number, address. You could even do something that matches close to the address. You could, of course, do global ID. You'd want to do if anybody's suspended. You'd want to do type, city. So all of these are fields that we could set up to query over here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and, let's hit this lab results endpoint to kind of see if it works as well. So we'll probably have to do a similar thing where we fix the limit. And this is also not set up for queries yet. But okay, so we go ahead and got a live reload there. And so now let's check out now we're just going to hit the lab results endpoint and see what happens. Okay, it looks like we may have gotten an error. Okay, so we got a 404. So that means this endpoint was not found. So we probably want to also set up our URLs, to better handle 404s. Because, the idea of any of any API is you want to handle all endpoints elegantly. So, if somebody hits your base endpoint, you want to, so here's just a look at some of the other endpoints of the Canlytics API. So, so if somebody hits the base endpoint, so let's just say you just hit the base here, you still get a status code. And then you actually get a message. So it actually says, okay, welcome to the Canlytics API. We probably want to touch this up instead of data. We may actually want to change that to message. But you're welcome to come in here and tinker on this, because this is just a completely open source, just sort of fun API that is just sort of set up just to tinker around with cannabis data. And like I said, I'm not set in stone to any technology. So if anybody has recommendations, fly them out. I'm not I'm not stuck in stone on anything. And so just to give you a look here, so we just hit the base endpoint. We just got this message. And so, not to get too off track here, but the idea is, to handle all endpoints elegantly. Okay, so the reason this one failed is we actually want to hit the test endpoint, the test leaf endpoint. So let's go ahead and hit that endpoint and see what happens. And I'll publish all of this afterwards so that, actually I'll do that right now. That way you can actually hit the live API. Okay, so now we've got we've got our response. We've got our status code. And hopefully we have 2 lab results. Okay, so we're still returning lab results. Let's actually fix that real quick. So that actually is kind of annoying me. So it may annoy other people. I think it's just better if this just returns. I think it's just better if it just returns the documents as a list. Got our live reload. And see, this is what's nice about, cooking up your own little API here. Because now, with just a couple lines of code, we've now got this as a list. And if you prefer it as something else, then, get in there and tinker and change it. So now, we've got our list here. We've got 2. And, we've got these lab results. And so these are the exact same, lab results as these are the same lab results, from that LCB data dump. So, here's the link to the data dump. Okay, but long story short, so we've gone a long ways now. We've basically gone from this data dump here. We've gotten the data into Firebase. We did that with the help of the Cannalytics engine. And so you're welcome to go and explore over here, and check out the Firebase module. We've used the import data function. And then if you want just examples of that, go check out test, because the test is, this can get you started. That's how you initialize Firebase, create some documents, and then import your data. And then, now that we've got our data in Firebase, we need a way to interact with it. So we've got the Cannalytics API. And that's as simple to use as just, making some GET requests to, to these various endpoints. And then you've got this full suite of data. And just to go ahead and polish it off, I'll just go ahead and round it out by just showing you. So you've done the installation. All right, so you've got the Cannalytics API. So you've done the installation. We've done the development. We've done the testing. And so now it's time to publish. Well, that's as easy to do. It's just, npm, and so that's why I have Node, is to expedite the publishing process. So what's going on here? So if you go and look over here and publish, so basically we're containerizing the API. So we create a container of the API. Then we push the container up to Google Cloud. And then we actually are then redirecting all hosting from Firebase. So over in Firebase, we've actually got hosting, and you can set up multiple sites here. And we've actually got the the Cannalytics API up here. And so right now we're containerizing everything, and it's going to be a little bit of a build process here. So we're publishing that. And so I'll just sort of minimize this and then sort of bring it all home here. So that way we can get people out of here in time for their next seminar. All right. So sorry to just kind of go on that long spiel there, but what's your impact? What's your input? Too complicated of a way to get data, or a manageable way?
I mean, it's really cool. It's probably a little more than what I would need, but it's really interesting.
Well, this just got posted over here. So here in these last couple of minutes, we'll
I mean, I can see if
see.
I wanted to do like more advanced things, this would be really useful.
So now it's published. So now in this last minute, let's see if we can't move over to the production endpoint and get the same. We looks like there was an error along the way. That's interesting. Oh, I need a. But we got 200 status codes. And so if we check out our data here, we've got the 2 MMEs and we have our 2 lab results. So thank you for bearing with it, but there's essentially, an MVP, a minimal viable product, right? So we've basically taken our data, we've gotten it into Firebase storage. Oops. Well, anyways, we've got it there using the engine, and now we've retrieved it from the the Cannalytics API. So you're welcome to go tinker on that and see what happens. but but anyways, it looks like there's still some debugging to do. So I'll go ahead and wrap it up there. But thank you for attending, and I'll fill you in and let you know what's going on next week. And next week we'll be checking out that SQL database.
Cool. All right. See you then.
Awesome. Thanks for attending, Nick.
Yep. Bye.
Bye. Bye.